We're glad to have you here. To our esteemed panelists, we're thrilled to have you here. When Judge Kretzer asked me if the law school would be interested in hosting this program, this was an easy yes for us. This is an issue of such importance internationally, nationally, in our state and locally, and putting the focus on local issues involving human trafficking seems like a perfect role for the law school to host this discussion. It aligns with the work that we already do. We as part and where we look to collaborate with all of you and with community partners through our Government Law Center, which is a thought leader on issues of the day, like human trafficking. In our Law Clinic and Justice Center, where some of you may know, we have an immigration law clinic where our students are being trained to do work in this space and are already engaging with folks who are looking at this issue in the Capital District. We stand ready to do more of that work. Our Clinic and Justice Center serves underserved people in the immigration area, in health law, in family violence, around low-income taxpayers. We do work in collaboration with David Soer's office in the Special Victims Unit through our DV hybrid clinic. So our students are learning to do this work. It is part of the mission of Albany Law School to be a good community partner. And we hope that today will allow us to serve that purpose. We hope you enjoy our beautiful facilities. We hope you get a lot out of today, even though we know that some of the conversations will be difficult. It is tough issues, but thank you for being here. Enjoy the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Willett.
Darkness of your soul.
There are like 25 maybe guys a day. He took advantage of like a kid.
Nobody's daughter, regardless if their mom ain't in their life or anything, nobody's daughter deserves to go through that.
Many times we drive by strip clubs or we'll see a prostitute on the street and we'll think, how disgusting, or you know, why don't they go get a real job? And it's so much deeper than that. It's so much bigger than that. It's all about self-esteem and what they've experienced in life and how people have treated them. And these women, like us, they're looking for love. They're looking for someone that really does love them. And I don't think many of them have experienced unconditional love or even parental love because of the families they've come from.
He took advantage of me to the fullest. He took advantage of like a kid. After the damage he did to me, I was proud to be a prostitute. That's the bad stuff how bad it was. I was proud to be a prostitute. I was a junior in high school. I wasn't 18 years old yet. I was maybe 16 or 17. I found a phone book ad. Sometimes I couldn't wake up for school. I would sleep until 2 or 3 in the evening. They had tried desperately to wake me up and couldn't. I did not know at this time that there were being drugs slipped into my food. would wake up in the most random places. I'd wake up on the freeway. I'd wake up on in mental hospitals. I'd wake up in taxi cars and in other people's houses. I remember making out with people and don't remember the beginning or the end. And I was found unconscious on Jerry's doorsteps. I woke up in the hospital. I had no clothes on. The only person that helped me was this nurse came in and she said, "You don't owe them anything but 2 fingers." And I said, "He's my dad. He didn't mean to do this." And she, sounded kind of angry, but she said, "That man is not your dad. He's your pimp." And I really didn't know what she was talking about. He wrecked my life for like a long time, and I was in the right place at the right time, or else I'd be out there prostituting and not wanting help at all.
The video you've just seen is from Ohio, but lest you think that this is a problem that occurs elsewhere, I'm going to show you this. I'd like to introduce you to Cherry, whose services were recently advertised along with dozens of others in the Albany section of Backpage.com. And Cherry was available at the Albany Colony Center Mall. Or how about this one? Tiffany, quote, age 24. She looks more like 15 to me. I'm Rachel Kretzer. I'm a judge of the Albany City Criminal Court and chair to welcome you to the program. Over the next couple of hours, I suspect you will be informed, enlightened, outraged, sickened, and hopefully emboldened to fight against modern-day slavery and at least give consideration to the idea that the girls you've seen in these ads are not just, quote, whores. And that maybe, just maybe, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. Dean Willett, thank you so much. And to everyone at Albany Law School who has been so gracious in hosting today's program. And all of the sponsors. It's not easy to put on free CLE. Is this better? All right. It's not easy to put on free CLE programs. It takes a lot of effort from a lot of organizations, and we pulled together a great team to make this program possible. And we have what I think is an extraordinary program. I'm encouraged by the attendance here today. And I'm told this may be some sort of a record. Clearly, this subject has touched a nerve in our community. And I want to thank Attorney General Schneiderman, who just joined us, so much, and I'll get to him in just a minute. For the benefit of those viewing online, I'm going to take a risk and start trying to name all of the dignitaries here in the audience. I'm sure I'll miss someone, but I'll start with Court of Appeals Judge Leslie Stein, who is here not just as a Court of Appeals judge, but as a past chair of the Gender Fairness Committee and a current member. and Judge Kathy King, who is here all the way from Brooklyn, who is president of the National Association of Women Judges, New York chapter. And Supreme Court Justice Christina Reba is here, Judge Jill Keene, Judge Carmela Lacudero, James Milstein, who is both the Regional Immigration Assistance Center Director and the Public Defender for Albany County. And speaking of Public Defender, we have with us somewhere up there Sherry Brooks, the alternate Public Defender for Albany County. And Heather Fisher is here from Love 146, which is a National Human Trafficking Association, Victim Services Association. Lisa Frisch, our own Lisa Frisch, who everybody knows, Executive Director of the Legal Project in Albany. And of course, a member, practically runs the committee that I technically chair. And Ray Brescia, I saw come in, who is the outgoing director of the Government Law Center, which the dean referred to, which is the think tank for, I believe, for Albany Law School. And he is also an Albany Law School professor. I'm sure I missed somebody, and if I did, I do apologize. Special thanks. Now, where did he go? There he is. If you think he's just our tech guy, you're making a really big mistake. This is John Carr, who many of you know as former senior reporter for the New York Law Journal, and before that for the Times-Union. And a couple of years ago, he came over to the court system, and we are so lucky to have him in the court system. This program is basically John's brainchild. He has been involved in every single phase of the planning and preparation for today's program, and we are deeply grateful to John Carr. Now, this afternoon, you'll hear from judges, law enforcement officials, and service experts, and I hope that by the end of the afternoon, we will have agreed that not only is there a problem, but there is something that we can all do about it. In 2007, the New York State Legislature, with the strong support of then Senator Eric Schneiderman, who you'll hear from momentarily, enacted the state's very first law addressing sex and labor trafficking. And New York's law was rightly hailed as a national model. It criminalized both labor and sex trafficking, provided for social services and government benefits to otherwise ineligible victims. It raised the penalty for patronizing, made sex tourism a crime, and established what many consider to be the most robust statute of its kind in the country. Unfortunately, that powerful weapon has to a large extent fired blanks, especially in upstate New York. You have statistics in your folders, and those will be discussed in greater detail later by one of our panelists. But suffice it to say that outside of New York City, and especially in the 3rd Judicial District, human trafficking prosecutions are almost unheard of. I've been on the bench for over a decade, and I've seen a steady parade of prostitution cases in that time. I've seen the sad, vacant looks in their eyes. I've seen the despair etched in their faces. These women have lost all sense of human dignity. In all that time, I have not had a single human trafficking prosecution, and I've seen exactly one John in my courtroom. And I don't certainly mean to pick on law enforcement, especially those who are with us today. Their very presence here shows how much they care. This is not strictly a local puzzle. One of the items in your folder is an article that begins, quote, "In the United States, we seem to have more anti-trafficking organizations than we have human trafficking prosecutions. In fact, according to the State Division for Criminal Justice Services, 41 of the 62 counties in New York State have not reported a single sex trafficking arrest since New York enacted its anti-trafficking statute in 2007. Yet 18,656 people, 90% of whom are female, have been arrested for prostitution during the same period, and about 10,000 were arrested for patronizing." And note that I said arrest. Conviction is another story. Outside of New York City, there have been 61 arrests for sex trafficking and a grand total of 4 convictions. This afternoon, we'll discuss what makes these cases so very difficult to prosecute and adjudicate, as well as the remedies for a problem that we know exists right outside these doors. We're delighted and honored to begin our program with a special appearance by New York State's Attorney General, the Honorable Eric T. Schneiderman. Mr. Schneiderman.
Thank you, Your Honor, Your Honors, my colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, but I want to say that I'm essentially here to discuss a problem that your presence indicates you already care about and know about, but really also to put in perspective the progress that we've made in New York, in fact, the leadership that we've supplied nationally in New York. And my office joins you in our commitment to make more progress, and I'm going to talk about a very exciting development that I think is going to help us in this area a great deal. Thanks to you all for being here. Thanks to Albany Law School for hosting us, to Judge Kretzer and for everyone else who's made this possible. Particularly, I have to give a shout out to the 3rd Judicial District's Gender Fairness Committee. This is a terrific event, and it's very important because, as I'm going to discuss, we have areas of our state where our powerful laws are simply not being used. It is not really my purpose here just to raise awareness about this matter, but also to focus on ways that we can ensure that in all parts of our state, law enforcement and service organizations and others in government can move as aggressively as possible to combat human trafficking. And you know, of course, that every year millions of men, women, and children are trafficked within our own country and across international borders. Yet, human trafficking is still a poorly understood crime, both by the general public and actually by a lot of people in law enforcement. And it may be partly because human trafficking has some counterintuitive elements. It presents unique challenges for police officers, prosecutors, and the courts. Victims of labor trafficking are often undocumented immigrants who are reluctant to cooperate with authorities, fear deportation. In sex trafficking cases, victims fear the prosecution for prostitution. Many victims are coerced, are blackmailed, or abused. Sometimes they start cooperating, then stop, provide inconsistent statements about their traffickers over the course of an investigation. And tragically, this is made worse by the fact that so many victims of sex trafficking are children. It's estimated that 1 in 6 missing children end up being trafficked for sex, and approximately 1/3 of teen runaways are approached by sex traffickers within the first 48 hours they are on the street. So this is a massive challenge, and it calls for aggressive, creative solutions. Let's start with the understanding that with the gridlock and dysfunction in Washington, I don't think we can expect much help from the federal level anytime soon. So it really is up to those of us at the state and local level, it's up to the people in this room to end this deplorable form of modern-day slavery. And thanks to the hard work of lawyers, judges, advocates, law enforcement officials, New York really has been a national leader in fighting this epidemic. It was already mentioned that when I was still serving as a state senator, in 2007 we passed the New York State Human Trafficking Act, creating some of the strongest and most comprehensive anti-trafficking policies in the nation. We drastically increased the penalties for trafficking and created an interagency human trafficking task force that recommends best practices for law enforcement. More importantly, we started treating coercion, either by threat of violence or the promise of jobs, drugs, or money, as the serious crime that it is. And we built on this. In 2008, we passed a safe harbor law that transformed how the justice system can treat some of the most vulnerable victims of trafficking, children and young people charged with prostitution-related offenses. The law created a process to divert these victims away from delinquency proceedings and into supportive services. It authorized the creation of safe houses that accept, house, and provide treatment to sexually exploited youth. Then, in 2010, we took it further by becoming the first state to enact legislation that provides victims of sex trafficking an appeals process to vacate previous convictions of prostitution-related offenses. That was tremendously important. We all know in law enforcement we need the cooperation of victims to deal with any crime, and with a crisis like this, we need a lot of cooperation. But if they feel afraid of the police, afraid of the system, they won't cooperate. And last year, the legislature passed the Trafficking Victims Protection and Justice Act, which enhances the penalties for sex and labor traffickers and significantly expands protective services for victims. Just this week, the legislature passed a bill to help victims of trafficking connect to a national hotline for support. Posters featuring the National Human Trafficking Resource Center's hotline are going to soon be up in bus stations, highway rest stops, hospitals, and near adult-themed businesses, places where victims of trafficking or their friends may see them. So, ladies and gentlemen, New York has been moving in the right direction, and I would urge you that we are very much at the forefront of states trying to grapple with this problem. But the fight against traffickers requires a shift in consciousness, a real sea change in how we think about these cases, because it's very hard to overcome the old pattern of thought by which we have treated for many decades victims of trafficking as criminals. Young people who have been coerced or forced into prostitution have been sent to jail for a long time. Workers that were trafficked for their labor were really relegated to the shadows, afraid of deportation. And these victims are victims not just of individuals, but the victims of a broken system. And so in trying to change the frame for thinking about this, my office has adopted what we call a victim-centered approach to fighting human trafficking. And let me give you an example of what this looks like in action. In 2013, my organized crime task force announced the arrests of 3 operators of a sex trafficking ring that stretched across central New York, Syracuse, Watertown, Ithaca, and other cities. The ring preyed on women and girls as young as 15 years old. The traffickers intimidated them with physical force and supplied them with cocaine, heroin, and other drugs to keep them ensnared. But instead of arresting these women, we provided them with help and sanctuary, and in one of the first successful prosecutions under the 2007 trafficking statute, the top ringleader pleaded guilty and was sentenced to up to 12 years in prison. So we are making progress, but as the judge noted, the fight against human trafficking has been very uneven across our state. Since the anti-trafficking law was passed in 2007, as noted, most counties have yet to report a single sex trafficking arrest. And of the more than 400 sex and labor trafficking arrests since 2007, only 80, less than 1 in 5, have been outside New York City. Many upstate law enforcement agencies lack the resources, time, and tools that they need to deal with this complex crisis. And that's something that we need to address. And I'm pleased to say that today we're going to announce something that my office is going to be doing to help all the law enforcement agencies in the state up our game in this area. Partly, the new system I'm going to announce relates to the fact that trafficking has been transformed through the internet. Traffickers have moved their operations off of street corners and onto websites. The disturbing ads you saw during the introduction to this program are really just the tip of the iceberg. 3/4 of all underage sex traffic victims say they were advertised to predators online. That makes tracking and monitoring these victims increasingly difficult for local law enforcement, because pouring through the torrent of online ads is not only prohibitively labor-intensive, but it mostly leads to dead ends. Much of the information in online postings is fake. The names aren't real. They nearly always list the victims as at least 18 years old. Even photos are of people over 18. So it's hard to deal with it in the old-fashioned way. When you look at the ads in the aggregate, though, patterns do emerge, and those patterns hold the key to making real progress in this fight. In my office, we believe in using every tool in the toolbox, and when your tools aren't working, sometimes you have to invent a new tool, which is exactly what we've done. And today I'm very proud to announce that we're going to have the ability in our office in the weeks ahead to provide free software and training to law enforcement agencies across New York State so we can actually use the data from sex ads to identify, locate, and assist trafficking victims all across New York. The program, called Spotlight, is made possible through our partnership my office has formed with a nonprofit organization called Thorn that's committed to using technology to identify and protect child victims online. This program was built very much to get at the problem that baffles and frustrates many law enforcement officers. It was built in consultation with anti-trafficking advocates, trafficking survivors, but really also with some folks who just have a very sophisticated understanding of data mining and manipulation of data. Thorn software creates a database of online ads and provides tools for tracking and tagging potential victims. The database sorts through millions of ads and uses learning algorithms to connect disparate data sources to proactively find suspicious ads. By spotting patterns in wording, in phone numbers, locations, or photos in ads, Spotlight can turn an ocean of information into targeted leads for law enforcement. Several law enforcement agencies across the state, including my own, are already using the tool in anti-trafficking efforts with promising results. And in fact, I'm very pleased to announce that right here, two leaders on this issue, Albany District Attorney David Soares and Albany Police Chief Brendan Cox, have already signed on to using the Spotlight program, and we will be working with them. So together with Thorn, my office will train any law enforcement agency that is committed to finding and disrupting sex trafficking operations. Needless to say, we're going to do this free of charge. I'm joined here today by someone who is really the architect of this program, Nick Ciplina, an attorney and senior counsel in my office who has been instrumental in much of our anti-trafficking work, and he's going to be around to answer any questions that you have about the program later on. But in the coming weeks, we'll also be sending information about the program directly to law enforcement agencies across the state. So we start off this program with a very sober understanding of the gravity of this problem, but I think we should also start off with the understanding that in the state of New York, we have demonstrated the aggressive, creative approach that is needed to deal with this problem once and for all. And I think that Spotlight has the potential to provide a huge boost, and that once again, New York can model for the country what an aggressive, creative commitment to ending human trafficking looks like. Our victim-centered approach, combined with the use of cutting-edge technology, this is really the way we see forward to deal with this crisis. Today's event is an important step, and it's just another step in this path to making New York a national leader in the fight against trafficking. So I thank you all for what you do. My office has been very heavily involved in this. I have been very involved in it since before I was the Attorney General, and you can be sure that we will continue to provide whatever support, tools, and leadership we can, and stand shoulder to shoulder with you and the thousands of committed activists and advocates across our state to address this crisis. We can make more progress. We can do better. We need to all be on the same page. We need to all speak with one voice. But it's time to shift the way we think about these crimes, and it's time to use every bit of information and every innovation in technology to address it. So thank you very much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Schneiderman. Thank you for your time and insight here today. Belated thank you for co-sponsoring that all-important law in 2007. And thank you so much for that initiative you've announced here today, which should help to facilitate the investigation and prosecution of human trafficking cases and hopefully up the numbers that right now are so pitiful. So thanks again. Now, before I get started, I want to note that in your packets, you should have index cards. The way we're going to handle questions is to invite you to write down those questions and give them to our, there they are, our assistants here today, by the way, who've done so much to make the program, behind the scenes, to make today's program possible. We have Dolores Bolden from the Office of Court Administration over there, and we have my legal intern, Tara Willett, no relation to the dean, who will collect the cards from you, and we'll try to get in as many of your questions as possible. So our first presentation today is an update on the law. This is going to be presented by my colleague and my friend, Andra Ackerman, judge of the Cohoes City Court. And I'm not going to give you a long introduction because the bios of all of the presenters are in your packets, and they're impressive bios, and I encourage you to read them. But basically, although she's fairly new to the bench, Judge Ackerman has been prosecuting sex crimes cases for many, many years and trains the prosecutors, trains the law enforcement. So we're delighted to have you.
Good afternoon. It is such an honor to be here and part of this program today and on a topic that is so close to my heart. Can everybody hear me in the back, by the way? Fabulous, good, because I'm not good at standing still. So I want to tell you, I have about 15 minutes to update you on the law, so I'm not going to be able to get through everything in detail, but I'm going to give you an overview, and I'm here for questions as well, not only for, I think, 5 minutes at the end, but I'll be here throughout the day today. My hope is that in this short period of time, because we could talk about this and we could train about this all day and all week, my hope is that if we can get you to think differently, inform you about our sexually exploited youth that are often labeled as teenage criminals and prostitutes, we can inform you about their lives, which led them to the position that they are in as victims of sex trafficking. We can help you identify victims of sex trafficking and what to do when you do identify a victim of sex trafficking. I feel like then we're doing our job here today. That's it. It's on a touch screen, so. All right, should be it. So I'm going to start out quickly with the federal statute because a lot of people think, well, it's sex trafficking, human trafficking, why isn't this just being handled on a federal level? And it is, many times. So under the federal law, right, if you have a situation where an individual or an organization is recruiting, harboring, transporting, or obtaining a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, and that is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or where the person induced is less than 18 years old, the federal government can be involved in it, the federal agency. The reason why we have the New York State law, in large part, is because of the available resources on the federal level. They found that there was a gap in the system. There were a lot of domestic victims, for example, where you may have 3, 2, or 1 in an investigation, that the feds just don't have the resources and the time because they're often involved in much larger scale situations. And we wanted to make sure in New York that all victims are able to be, perpetrators will be able to be held accountable for the crimes against those victims. So, but what's important here is that on the federal level, if the person that is being induced is less than 18 years old, they see that person as a child that is a victim of severe trafficking. We don't have that in the New York State statute on a criminal penal law level, and that does cause us some problems that we're going to talk about. This is a large slide. I don't expect you to read all of it up there, but that is basically the 234 section of sex trafficking, and it mirrors prostitution. And all of those things that you see listed up there are all part of force, fraud, or coercion. They're all examples of what would also be deemed sex trafficking and human trafficking on the federal level. The nice catch-all at the end is under H, if there's any act calculated to harm the health, safety, or immigration status to the patronized person. They really are very thorough on this level. As I said, if they just don't have that section that if you're under the age of 18 or 17, that you're automatically being trafficked. But this is what to look at. This is where the statute is. And there's so many, when you look at these identifying factors, you're going to find a lot of pimps, pimp-controlled prostitution, employ these. This is like the pimp's model of keeping that individual, that sexually exploited individual, often referred to as a prostitute, under their control. And that's really how they ended up getting a lot of these, is speaking to victims of trafficking. After that law came into place, the state realized that it's very hard. You're going to learn this throughout the day this afternoon as well, is that when you identify a victim of sex trafficking, and that fits under the statute where you can prosecute it, it is not that easy. Because these victims, you're going to learn quickly, have so many issues that are bigger to them than the criminal prosecution. So in order to get them in a position where they're going to be able to testify, they're going to be able to stick around, they're going to need shelter. A lot of them are addicted to the drugs provided by the perpetrator in order to get them to stay in line. They need services. They may have children by the perpetrator. They have feelings for these perpetrators oftentimes that need a lot of counseling. You can't just identify a victim of trafficking and then not provide services and expect to succeed. Not on one case. You just need that help. So this comes out. You've got Safe Harbor that provides sexually exploited youth under the 18 years of age with services. The frustrating part on this is, although the wording is great, what it comes down to when we talk about some things that are conflicted with our law, you're 16 or 17 years old, you're under the age of 18, so under the Family Court Act and Social Services Law, you're eligible for services. However, in the New York State penal law system, you can still be charged with prostitution or prostitution-related offenses, and it happens regularly. So there's a gap here in our system. And it's really outlined very well in these two cases that I put up for you. People versus Samantha, the judge in that case, saw this conflict in the law with respect to Safe Harbor for exploited children. When a 16-year-old was arrested for prostitution, they dismissed that case. But then during the same year, I believe it is, you had a different judge with a 17-year-old girl, almost under identical circumstances, that did not dismiss the case and said, basically, this is for the legislature to change. It's not for this court to change. So as you can see, that there's conflicts in the law that have to be dealt with. As an ethical issue, I really think for defense attorneys, and by the way, I really want to get some ethics pieces in here because it's going to help us get the ethics credit. You really need to look at these cases, use cases like People versus Samantha when you have situations where you have a 16 or 17-year-old in court, because it's in total conflict with the Family Court Act and Safe Harbor. Do I need it? Oh. Jeez, all right. I'm sorry, I'm going to mess this up, guys. I'm not good with microphones. So now we have CPL 44010, which this is a big situation. This is really great. But it's also going to show another conflict that we have in our law. But for right now, if you look at CPL 44010, subdivision 1I, judges now can vacate convictions for prostitution or loitering of engaging in prostitution offense if the arrest was, in quotes, the result of having been a victim of sex trafficking in New York State statute or federal statute. What I love about this is you look at People versus GM, and they changed the name because she dismissed that case. She wants to protect the rights of that individual. But Toko Sarita, a judge out in Queens, was not able to be here today, but she's an amazing human being and a very strong proponent of these human trafficking. And she's actually heads the Human Trafficking Intervention Court out in Queens. She actually expanded the scope through her decision because she understood that, for example, if you have an individual who is sex trafficked, and in that case specifically, you had someone who the trafficker was making her purchase the drugs for him because he didn't want to be arrested for it. So she was made to make the purchase and turn it over to him. She had gotten arrested for the possession of the drugs in a conviction. And I believe this may have been one, if not this one, another one, where there was a weapon on her that her perpetrator gave her in case she had a problem with one of the Johns up in the apartment. So she's arrested for criminal possession of a weapon. What I love that Judge Sarita said is, you know something? That those convictions were the result of having been a victim of sex trafficking. But for that, they wouldn't have had those convictions. So she dismissed all of them, all of those convictions. People versus Gonzalez, you have a situation, 86 convictions were dismissed. They were all loitering or prostitution charges. And the Jane Doe case, I love that. If you have a moment to read that, because when we talk about ethical responsibilities, I really believe all parties in the justice system that we have once it enters the courts, the defense attorneys, prosecutors, and judges, we all have an ethical responsibility to look at situations like this. For example, this individual was clearly trafficked. She testified credibly in court. And before she even testified, the DA had done a thorough investigation based upon the public defender raising this issue. Agreed with the support of her testimony that this victim was trafficked, and not only basically argued that they wanted the judge to dismiss this as well. So joined in the application, basically. And it was just really nice reading it. They had all parties agreeing that she was a victim of sex trafficking, and that all of her charges should be dismissed. But I'm curious now if anybody's thinking in their head right now that there's a little conflict here in our law, right, when it comes to this section. We've got a situation where we can go through a 440 hearing and say, hey, this individual was a victim of sex trafficking, so all of these charges, right, should be dismissed. But yet we're arresting them in the first place, and we are convicting them after they're arrested. I get sometimes that there's an initial arrest, and that's what brings them into court. And we're going to talk about all those factors today. But the fact is, at the end of the day, those victims were re-victimized, being convicted of this crime, only to be turned around and have them vacated by the same court. Does everybody see that? Some people to see that that's really a contradiction in our law. I'm glad that we have this, but it's sad that we have to put them through that process and then turn around to vacate them. So I think we've kind of nailed down some of these contradictions. But one thing I wanted to say that's really important, because I'm going to play a video in a second. Part of the reason why I'm talking so fast is because I want to play this clip at the end. Because the average age for induced prostitution on children is 12 to 14 years of age. And you may be sitting in the chair thinking, you know, if anybody sees a 12-year-old, they're going to see them as a victim. And I'm telling you, if a law enforcement officer is called because there's a man, let's say 35 years old, in the car, you know, in a park with a 12-year-old, and come to find out there's been sexual contact then, let's say there's been sexual intercourse, we all know sitting here that that guy's going to be prosecuted, and with no major problems with the case, we know a couple of things. He can be charged with predatory sexual assault against a child. That, upon conviction, is 25 years to life because he's over 18 and she's under 13, and there's sexual intercourse. Bam. We know at minimum he's going to be a registered sex offender, and there's a big problem with this guy. Different scenario where you get a call from complaints on prostitution on the street, and they do a sting operation, and a 12-year-old comes in, and she says, hey, you're the third car I've been in tonight, right, for providing oral sex for $20 to $50 to $80. The mind shifts with a lot of people, and they see her as a prostitute, they see her with a problem, and they're not looking for the Johns that received oral sex from her. And for those of you who are thinking, it doesn't really like that, now I'm going to show you a clip in a second, because I think that's a huge contradiction in how we view these cases, where she's equally as a victim of a sexually exploited youth in that vehicle in either situation. I pulled this, I used to be the director of the Office of Human Trafficking Prevention and Policy for the Division of Criminal Justice Services, and part of my job was to look online on the back page ads. Every time I did a training, I would show them what was happening in their community. That's what I did for those two slides here. But I came across this video. This was almost 2011, so you're looking at 4 years after the law's been in place. And I want you to see this video because I feel like this is still the struggle that we have today by shifting that paradigm of our thought process with respect to these cases and identifying victims of trafficking.
city's north side offering sex for money. An undercover Vice Squad officer made the arrest at around 9 o'clock last night. Jeff Kulikowski says the girl's age isn't the only troubling part of this.
The undercover officer who made the arrest was actually here responding to complaints of prostitution in this area. When he made the arrest, he knew the girl was a prostitute. He just had no idea she was a 6th grader.
Between Lieutenant Corbett, who has 37 years, and myself, who has 36, I guess that's what, a total of combined of over 70 years. This is the youngest individual that we have ever arrested for prostitution.
The chief says city streets aren't seeing any more prostitution than they have before. And he says another person this age on the streets is very unlikely, but this one is definitely troubling to him. According to the officer, when he pulled over around 9 last night, the girl asked if he had any money. When he asked what for, that's when the officer says she offered him the sexual acts for $20.
She says, I've been doing this for a while now. She says, this is the second car I've been in tonight. She said, so, I mean, boy, that certainly is concerning.
It all ended a couple of streets over here on Pond Street just a few minutes later, but it probably started a much larger investigation into why a girl so young was on the street selling herself. In Syracuse, Jeff Kulikowski, News Channel 9.
Now, the girl was released to her mother, but Chief Miguel says right now he's unable to say if the woman knew what her daughter was up to. He says a police investigation.
So when I saw that, I was so frustrated on so many levels. First of all, at the very end, did you hear she's released to her mother? Does anybody here think a 12-nice guy, it's a lack of training, it's a failure to identify? Things need to be done to change that. But he was literally, I asked him, did anyone with special victims experience interview her? They had not. Shipped her back to her parents. Within 24 hours, she ran away, and she had been unfound. So it's very frustrating. That's what I want you to see is why we are here and how important this is. And I want to thank you so much for your time. I think I've made my 20 minutes. I understand that there may be questions possibly. Anybody questions? Any quick questions before I sit down that weren't written on a card? Anything? I spoke very fast. Yes.
The 440 hearing, is that something that's a matter of right when there's a certain type of conviction, or what is the standard that something has to prove?
That's a great question. What has to happen is that there has to be an identification of that. So what usually happens is a victim's arrested on another charge or something, has a conversation with their public defender or their attorney, then it's really, that's the ethical obligation, is to go through that criminal history. Once you find out that that person is a potential victim of human trafficking, to bring out together as a team with the district attorney, with the judge, do that investigation. And what's nice about it, that last case that you saw in there, it was easy peasy because going into it, everybody knew what they were going to do. Does that make sense? Anybody else?
Don't be shy. All right. Well, there may be a flaw in our question and answer program. You've got to write neatly.
That's a great question. Here we go. We have with respect, and I'm just going to say I'm an alleged prostitute. I'm supposed to use a microphone for CLE too, I'm sorry. It says, what happens if it becomes her word against the Johns and the ADA believes him and not underage? That's a great question. But I can tell you there's so many things. So I want to start for a second. Those cases that are on the 440, you will see one of the judges, actually Judge Sarita, I believe, came out and said, I don't need anything more, because actually John Temple, who I know very well and respect, he opposed that motion for the 86 convictions that were withdrawn. And the judge, and one of the things he said is that this wasn't even corroborated, and the judge was like, hey, wait a minute, we don't need corroboration. I don't need corroboration. I found her to be credible, and I'm dismissing these charges. But don't think that very often it's a he said, she said. There's so many factors that I hope that you'll learn through the CLA today, from the worst end of branding someone or doing a little investigation and finding where there's one victim, there's usually more, because when he's done with her, he's going on to another one. And I shouldn't just say he, because there are female perpetrators as well, in many of them, but it's just easier for me to do it that way. I hope that answers your question. Anyone else?
You'll
Okay.
have another crack at Judge Ackerman because she's about to have a seat and join our judicial panel. We are now going to turn the program over to 3 judges. Judge Fernando Camacho of the Suffolk Supreme Court. Would you be kind enough to come up now? Judge Camacho is a national leader on the subject of human trafficking ever since he had an epiphany, as he describes it, and I'm sure he'll talk more about that in just a moment. And Buffalo City Court Judge, please come up, Amy Martocci, who presides over the Human Trafficking Intervention Court in Buffalo, and once again, Judge Ackerman. And I'm going to start with you, Judge Camacho.
Okay, hello. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to share with you this afternoon my own personal story and journey of redemption that got me to this point. And it started over 30 years ago when I was a young prosecutor in Manhattan DA's office, working the early morning hours at a lobster shift. About 2 o'clock in the morning, the young kids, they were kids, would walk out in daisy chain. Everybody in the audience would snicker and laugh. And they'd come out one at a time before the bench, and we would play a game called Let's Make a Deal. It would work like this. I, as a prosecutor, would say, Judge, she's got 10 convictions for prostitution, 30 days. My friend Mike Pinero, the defense attorney, would say, Judge, come on, she's a kid, 10 days. And the judge would cut it in half. All right, 20 days in jail, take charge. And as I looked at their faces walking back toward the cell, and they were crying, mascara coming down, you know, those lost eyes, poor lost eyes. There was nothing, there were dead eyes. It would break my heart. And my antenna would say, that's wrong, what are you doing? And yet I did it again and again and again. And then about 10 years later, I became a judge, a city criminal court judge. And there I am again, I'm the one on the bench now. Judge, 30 days. No, Judge, 10 days, she's a kid. All right, 20 days, take charge. And I did that for about 3 years as a judge. And then my moment came one night, about 10 o'clock in a small arraignment courtroom in Queens County. And a young girl named Siobhan walked out, and she was, again, we were going through the same game, and the prosecutor saying, Judge, 30, she was 16, she had about 5 convictions for prostitution. Judge, 30 days. Judge, 10 days. I was about to say 20 days, and I looked at her. She looked up at me with those eyes, and I said, stop this madness, please, now. Come up. Why is this kid here? And the guy was in the audience, because he always knew where the guy was. He was in the audience giving her signs, take the plea, don't take the plea. And I looked at him, looked at her, I said, come up here. Please adjourn this case back to my part when I'm not working arraignments. I want to know her story. And I did that, and I learned her story a couple of weeks later. And every time I worked arraignments after that, every person charged with prostitution, I'm not taking a plea, I'm not sending it back to my part. Until one day the administrative judge said, hey, Fernando, how come you have a lot of prostitution cases in your all-purpose part? I've been meaning to talk to you about that. I got their stories, and their stories were tragic. They break your heart. It's the same story over and over again. Throwaways, runaways from dysfunctional homes, sexually abused, physically abused, looking for something, someone to care about them, to show them some love, to find a family. So they wind up running away or just hanging out somewhere where they meet Mr. Right, who says, hey, you're pretty, I like you. Come on, you want to come with me? Come to my car, let's go. And for the first week, they're living the high life. And he's finding out everything he can about her. Who do you love most in the world? My grandmother. Where she live? Okay, great. At the end of that week, okay, now I've given you so much drugs, I've given you, this, that, and the other thing. You owe me. You're going to work. So she gets put to work on the track. And the track is a desolate, awful place where they walk and they have sex with strangers, 12 or more every night, and they don't keep a dime. They come back, and if they're out of pocket, they don't have enough money for that night, they get beaten. There's rules. Pimps up, hose down. When the pimps come on the block, the girls have to step off the sidewalk. Pimp circle. Somebody does something wrong in the middle of the pimps, where they're beaten. If they try to run away, they get brought back. I'm going to find your grandma. I'm going to cut her fingers off. Real case. If you don't stay, Grandma, I'm going to bring your grandma's fingers in a box. You told me where she lived. Okay, I guess I better stay. Average age of entry into prostitution, 12 or 13 years old. These are not mature adults who make knowing and intelligent decisions. So way back when, with very few resources, we began, that Judge Sarita took over after I left, the first human trafficking intervention court, where every single prostitution case came to that part, and we started hearing their stories. I'm proud to say, I have never sentenced another person charged with prostitution to a jail sentence again after that day. So the focus became, let's not put them in jail, let's get them some help. Let's find the professionals who work with this population, who know the unique issues, who know how to get their trust and their confidence, and let's get them out of the life. And I did that for a number of years, and we had some failures. We had a young woman named Erin who was found at the age of 17, was found frozen to death in a railroad yard in a February morning, beaten to death and frozen to death. And we had some incredible successes. We had some survivors whose will and spirit was much stronger than any fist of any trafficker or any jail cell. And Siobhan was such a survivor. Over the years, she kept back and coming to see me even after she graduated from my court. Judge, I got my first computer. Judge, I just bought a car. Judge, I just got my first apartment. She would walk in. There's Siobhan. Stop the proceedings. I got to talk to my friend. And one day she stopped coming. So I got worried. It was a year and then another year. She didn't come. Where's Siobhan? Where's Siobhan? I have no way to find her. So I moved up a few floors in the building, and now I'm an important guy. And one day I'm in the middle of a meeting, and my secretary comes in. There's a woman out there, a young woman, says she has to see you. I said, I'll be there in a minute. I'll be there in a minute. Let me finish my meeting. So a half hour later, I come out, and she was gone, but the court officer gives me a note. And she says, hi, Judge, it's Siobhan. Don't worry, I'm not in trouble. I was just in the neighborhood, and I wanted to tell you that I'm doing this, I got that, I got my own apartment, I'm back with my mom, and she tells me a whole bunch of things. And at the end, she ends very simply. She says, but mostly, I just wanted to let you know that I'm good. And at that point, in front of the court officer, tears started coming down my eyes. I yelled out, Siobhan, I always knew you were good. But the story didn't even end there. A few years back, Judge Sarita, who took over from me in the Human Trafficking Intervention Court, decides she's going to have a celebration, 10th anniversary of the court, so she invites me out, and I'm really excited. And at the end of the speakers and everything else, everybody's, and everybody's there, and it's good to see everybody. She says, I have one more surprise for Judge Camacho. And in the courtroom, from the back walks Siobhan, her husband, her mom, and her little 2-year-old boy. I stood up, we ran toward each other, I gave her the biggest hug, and we cried. Later on, in talking to her mom, at the end, she said to me, well, Judge, thank you so much. You saved my daughter's life. And as I thought about that and reflected upon that, who really needed saving? Who really needed a redemption? A 16-year-old kid who was a throwaway, who had no choice. Or a 43-year-old former homicide prosecutor, judge, who should have known better all along. And the bottom line is, who really saved who? So thank you.
That's an incredibly powerful and moving story. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And I can tell you personally, although I haven't been doing this as long as you have, as you were speaking, I was relating from the heart to what you were saying. And I'll tell you, that's why I'm standing here today. And that's why I'm involved in this program and have been involved in putting it together, because we all have to do something, but you're a leader, so thank you so much. And now, Judge Amy Martocci, who is the Human Trafficking Intervention Judge for Buffalo, will speak to us. But I want to say, there are 11 human trafficking courts
throughout the state. And the nearest one to Albany is Syracuse, or maybe Yonkers, which are 150 miles away. Just saying. All right, Judge Martocci.
Good afternoon, everybody. Is this working? Thank you. So I'm so glad to be here with all of you, and I have to say it's a really hard act to follow, Judge Camacho, because I don't know about all of you, but I was tearing up sitting next to him, and I've heard that before. But truly, that's what I have done, is follow Judge Camacho. I am the human trafficking judge in Buffalo, and I have been lucky enough to benefit from Judge Camacho's model. And I say this, it's not often that I can say that the judiciary is out in front on an issue, but on this issue, we really are out in front. And I am proud to be part of the forerunner in this. And I have to say that it has been a true partnership in Buffalo. The way that the 11 trafficking courts were created is through because there was one in Manhattan, there was one in Queens, and there were some in the boroughs, but it became a statewide pilot project under the leadership of Judge Jonathan Lippman. And when he created these pilot courts, as we call them, there was a great deal of skepticism in places like Buffalo, New York, and in places like Syracuse, New York. And there was sort of this unspoken belief that, well, prostitution is the oldest profession in the books, and it's a victimless crime. And let me tell you that nothing could be further from the truth. It is not a victimless crime. And once there became a partnership, a true partnership with law enforcement, and I credit the Buffalo Police Department, the District Attorney's Office, the Erie County Sheriff's Office for educating its officers, its prosecutors, and learning how to identify people who showed signs of trafficking, who were in commercial sex work. And once those people were identified, the idea, of course, is to provide services to them so that, not so we can save them, but because we're not saving anybody, so that they can make their own choices, they can be empowered to make other choices and get away from a life that they don't want to be living either, most often. And so I say that we have been really lucky in New York that the judiciary has been at the forefront. And I can also say that although Buffalo, sorry about that, Buffalo recently has had 2 very successful prosecutions of traffickers. Within the past 6 weeks, there's been a federal conviction, and there has been a local conviction in county court of traffickers. And that hasn't happened in a while, either in the local or federal system. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Martocci. Judge Ackerman.
Thank you. Most of my comments here are really going to be from being a former prosecutor dealing with special victims cases and working with sex trafficking victims and watching the judges in the courts that I handle the trials on. And I look back, and it's just so important for me to express this to everyone here as to what goes on through the perpetrator's mind, which gets me so fired up, I want to start prosecuting those cases again. So there's an article, there's a guy, Nicholas Kristof, who writes in the New York Times. He's fabulous. It's really worth looking him up online and reading an article. I think it was like in 2008. Where the New York Times actually sent about 100 letters out to perpetrators who were in custody for sex trafficking crimes, seeing if they would be interviewed. And some of them took them up on it because the New York Times wanted to learn more about this interaction, how you are luring these victims in. And when I read this, I was so angry. They were just very candid and said, you know, look, it's a lot of money, it's little investment. You look for throwaway kids. I look for, literally, they would say, I look for girls with backpacks on that, you know, nobody wants to be around. She's by herself. She's either hanging out around the school later, she's at the mall, internet chat sites. They're looking for throwaway kids that they know, in their mind, they know nobody cares about, right? And then they say it's so easy to lure them in. And again, you're looking at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids who have that feeling of not having any unconditional love. And you get someone who's going to start out being real nice to them and for getting their nails done, telling them that they're beautiful, becoming their boyfriend. It usually starts with having sex with them. And then it leads to, well, you know, you kind of got to help with the bills. Maybe can you have sex with my friend? He'll pay money. And all of a sudden, there's all this manipulation. There's fear, like what Judge Camacho said about threatening families, but it also is an emotional tie at times too, where all of a sudden they're not going to be able to be together if she's not helping with the bills, and then all of a sudden the violence comes in. And this trafficker knows, I mean, they've said it. They know that they'll make a lot of money from her because she's young and fresh, and you make more with the younger girls. When you do that to an individual over time, if she doesn't have mental health issues before she went in, she sure as heck is going to have it very quickly. She's going to get STDs, she's going to have other health problems, she's going to be addicted to drugs often because they're given to her. This perpetrator knows that when all this stuff adds up and now she's not making the money anymore, he can toss her out into the street and no one's going to believe her because he's gotten her to believe that she's committing a crime, and who the hell is going to care about her? Because nobody cared about her when he got involved, and now she's addicted to drugs, she's got STDs, other health issues, she's got major mental health issues, and he knows that law enforcement's not going to do anything. And what broke my heart in upstate New York when I was reading that is knowing a lot of times that is absolutely true, and it's just really failure to identify the victims and having a coordinated response. It's just lack of knowledge. And I got to tell you, this hits me a little bit more home because for what it's worth, I was a throwaway kid when I was younger. I was in an orphanage, I was in foster care, and I made it and I survived. I was not a victim of sex trafficking, but sure as heck could have been me. I know what it feels like to be a throwaway kid, and I know how vulnerable they are, and it fired me up to think that you can do that to a child. And then when you're done with her, you're not just messing with a year or two of her life, which is an ignorant thing that some people think, just lack of knowledge. Well, he really screwed with a year or two of her life. If she's ever able to get her life back on track after what that happened to her, it's a blessing because it takes a lot of hard work. So he's stripping her of her entire life. So I really had an extra passion for this when I was in Monroe County DA's office. I wanted all the serial rape cases, I wanted all the sex trafficking cases, and I found that the adult prostitutes, which are oftentimes can be working without a pimp, we're talking 30, 40-year-olds out there that are out in the streets at 2 in the morning who are getting raped. When meeting with them, I always talk to them on their level. Everybody is an equal to me. Nobody is above me and nobody's below me. And having that personality with them, because I know that could have easily have been me. When they learn to trust you, they tell you so much. I never met an adult victim of a sexual assault that was not victimized as a child. And to me, they take an innocent child, destroy her, and then she becomes a pathetic adult that nobody wants to deal with. And that's so sad for me because that's a beautiful life that's been stolen. So that's what fired me up. That's what had me have such success in the trials. It was really hard for me to leave, because it takes special people to do this kind of work. They're not easy to deal with when they're younger, they're teenagers, or when they get older, but they're beautiful souls. And I want to thank all of you guys really for being here to hopefully that we can increase the amount of people that are really supporting them and treating them as the victims that they are.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Ackerman, for sharing your knowledge, and she is one of the most knowledgeable people on this subject in the state, and for sharing your personal story. That meant a lot. Now, while you're thinking about questions for our panelists, and while Dee and Tara are collecting those questions, I have a question of my own, and I will direct this at Judge Camacho. Even though we all know that this is one of the strongest laws in the nation, possibly the strongest law in the nation, are there ways that this law can still be improved?
Well, let me get a plug in for something we're trying to do now. Our OCA Criminal Procedure Committee, after many, see, this also tells you about the mindset. These are other judges on this committee, and we had 6 months of debate. You know, the rape shield law doesn't apply to sex trafficking prosecutions. So if a victim of a sex trafficking offense is on the witness stand, fair game, you can ask them about anything. They don't have the protection of the rape shield law. And we're going to, OCA, hopefully Judge Marks agrees with the majority of us who voted to try to get this done, is going to try to get the rape shield law extended to sex trafficking cases. Sure, there's more we can do. I mean, my own colleagues, to this day, I mean, never mind 14 years ago when they're laughing at me, to this day they say, but Fernando, they're prostitutes. We have to change the mindset. We have to get people thinking about this differently. And I think I understand why. When I hear victims of sex trafficking, of survivors of sex trafficking talking all the time, telling their own horror stories, I want to do one of two things. I want to either cry, just get out and just start crying and bawling, or just run out of the room because I can't stand listening to it. We need to break through that barrier. People don't want to talk about this. And until we break through that barrier, we're not going to be able to make the law stronger.
Thank you, Judge Camacho. The first question I have is a good one. If the girl is not jailed or convicted, where does she go immediately? What does a judge do? You are not, many of us are reluctant now to jail prostitutes, but we want to intervene in their lives. So, how do we proceed?
I'll start with that answer.
Judge Martocci.
In Buffalo, we've worked out some great partnerships with some agencies, the International Institute of Buffalo and some other agencies. In our court, we are able to make a plan with someone before she is released so that she has somewhere to go on an emergency basis. Through the hard work of my court resource coordinator in connection with a whole lot of agencies, and frankly, some federal funding that has been allotted to the agencies in Buffalo. I will also say that sometimes it's difficult, sometimes it's a shelter, sometimes it's emergency funding to a hotel room, but there is always safety planning that is worked out before release, because certainly we don't want to keep someone incarcerated when her only crime is being arrested for engaging in prostitution.
Thank you. This is a very good time for me to acknowledge the victims' services advocates and groups that are present here today, and to thank all of you for what you're doing. We need more resources. That's the bottom line. We need more resources.
Because if I could just add on that, because when it comes to victims of sex trafficking, it's not as easy because a lot of the domestic violence shelters won't take them because of those special issues with them. There's concerns about them trying to recruit at times. So we work with OTDA, Office, right, OTDA, to provide agencies that will take them so that law enforcement agencies, courts know ahead of time where they can place them, because there are special needs that are, although have similar issues with domestic violence, that may not be the best place for them to be in the domestic violence shelter.
Interesting problem. The next question I have is, what happens when the pimp is underage? I haven't encountered that. I don't know if any of you have. No. So I guess generally they're not underage. From what I've read and what I've seen, generally they're not underage. It's the victim who's underage. All right, any other questions? Well, I'm sorry. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I mean, the answer to that, from my perspective, is that it's about mostly women in these circumstances being empowered to make their own choices. You try to give people connections so that they can make other choices, but ultimately the person has agency to make her own decisions. Well, Well, certainly, though, that would be a person who would be dealt with in family court as a person in need of supervision under a PINS provision, and those children would be taken care of specially and differently. We're talking more about people who are under our penal law criminally liable and over the age of 16. So when we're talking about younger children like you're referring to, there would certainly be a family court PINS proceeding, and they would be sent to a different location for sure. But I haven't handled that myself.
I actually had a situation, the first sex trafficking case that I had, she was 14 at the time, 15 when I had gotten her, but she was exploited at 14. We actually did put her in a placement that was out of the area. We were more afraid for her safety because of the defendant knew that if she didn't testify, they didn't have a case. We didn't have a case. So that actually, and that time away from him, because it took her 6 months to actually tell us fully what happened. She was still in love with the guy. And he exploited her horribly. So that one situation, and I thought to myself, even if I lose this prosecution, let's say, 6 months from now, as long as she's safe, she's away from him, I feel like I've done the most important part of my job, and it's keeping her safe. He ended up being convicted, so it worked out great. But
Actually, from a long last 15 years or so, there are many more organizations out there who work with this population. There are many more safe houses, many more places they can go. Compassionate, caring people are going to try to find them a safe place to live. I mean, back in 2002, this is what we did. The PIP is in the back. All right, officer, tell him the case is going to be called at 2 o'clock. Now bring her up. Let's take a collection. Get a delivery car. Is there any place you can go? Where? Give us an address. All right, clerk, take her down to the cab. It's right in the back. Go. And we hope for the best. Now there are organizations, because of this raised awareness, because of the heroes in this thing are the activists and the advocates, who for years and years and years have been talking about this and pounding their fists and their heads against the wall. Somebody listened to us. And they've gotten across, and because of that, because of the raised awareness, there are many, many more organizations, compassionate, experienced, caring people who are in a position to work with these with these kids and to find them a safe place to live.
But I actually think it's a very good idea for victims advocates to think about, the impulse is just to place people locally. But why can't we trade with other regions around the state so that we remove this particular victim from the area influenced, improperly influenced, and maybe trade back and forth, have some of our agencies take people from other jurisdictions. And
I don't think you can just say that carte blanche, though, because there's situations, one, that she may have a support, more of a support system.
Some of them do, but some of them don't. Yeah.
Yeah. That option is.
Actually, the traffickers do that. I don't know if you know this, but there's a whole network. If somebody's making them a lot of money, but they're being recognized now in this particular area. New York City, for example, are you going down to D.C. for a while? The other sect of the Bloods are going to be with them for a while, and then you're going to go down to Atlanta after that, and then Florida, and then 6 months from now you'll come back. So they're actually doing that.
And I don't know if you saw it, I think they're starting to bring them upstate more because we're not doing as much. So you'll see a girl, for example, online, and I used to have to go and look and see what's going on in the different communities. You'd see the same girl say one night only, she's in Albany, and then the next night, she's in Utica, and then she's in Syracuse, and there's a 718 number, there's 516 numbers. So the area codes, I'm thinking, to me, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to say, hey, there's a lot of sex trafficking arrests and investigations going down in the city. Let's pull her up here and take the travel because she's making so much money. You're looking at 12 guys a night with the young girls. It's at least $250 a pop. So you're making a lot of money every day and traveling the circuit and decreasing the chance that he's even going to get caught.
These are devious, brilliant people, and they're ahead of us, so we got to keep talking.
all right, we have two questions that I think fall under one umbrella. Often the victims fall off the grid, this question says, into this underbelly world. First of all, well stated, whoever said that. Where should we be looking to intervene outside of the courtroom? And the other question that relates is what's being done to engage the public schools or other agencies to identify kids at risk and intervene before they're found by the traffickers. Or maybe we should hold this for the panel that's coming up later. You know, that's actually a better question to ask the victim panel that we'll have. But if you have any
One thing
thoughts,
that
Judge.
the Attorney General talked about, I don't know if you just recently, a couple of days ago, the bill was passed where now jurisdictions are required to put up these posters, all in different, very prominent locations in their jurisdiction, where it advertises, if you're a victim, if you're doing something you don't want to do, and you're a victim of human trafficking, sex trafficking, here's a phone number. So that's just something that happened a couple of days ago.
That's absolutely right. That was announced just a couple of days ago. It just passed. I think it was a wonderful idea. Judge Richard Lee Price of the Bronx was the one who thought that up. He's been, he actually heads the Gender Fairness Committee in his jurisdiction.
And as to the question, what would have made the difference, or what does make the difference, I know that when I've spoken to victim services people in the past, what they have said is that in talking to the victims, or survivors, as we call them, what would have made a difference is if someone had actually asked them. They see that there's something not right, and people kind of keep their head down, and no one's inquiring, you know, why does this person who goes to the same bodega always have a hat on and a black eye sometimes, and, you know, isn't allowed to go out of the house at certain times. What they say is, ask. Is everything okay? Is there anything you need? And that's one thing that would have made a difference, at least to some people.
And then the next question, should the statute of limitations be changed so that when a 12-year-old who's been victimized is 32, she can go back and seek justice? And I know in part the statute does deal with that. In fact, it allows for expungement of records.
But beyond that, you have, beyond the sex trafficking, which is I know the B violence, now there's no statute of limitations. When an individual, 18 or over, has sexual intercourse, oral sex, with a child under the age of 13, there is no statute of limitation. It's a predatory sexual assault against a child. So that is there, and that's oftentimes what we see. So the good thing is what we need to do is shift, to have that mental shift to see, hey, that's a predatory sexual assault against a child. That's not a prostitution and a patronizing charge. So the laws are there.
Right. And as I said, if someone has been convicted of prostitution and they're the victim of sex trafficking, they can get that expunged, and that's something that we all have to remember. All right. I think we probably need to move on to our next panel. But before we do, oh, yes, Judge King.
You know what? I'm not a statistics person. I've never gotten into that. It's just from my own experience. I can just tell you, I've lost some young people. I have. I've lost them to the life. I lost them to jail. I lost them. They died. If you give somebody a chance, if you gain their confidence, if you get them to trust you, if you're able to do that, you put them in touch with the right person, 99%. It's about getting them in touch with that right person who is going to be able to find that little piece of them that says, I trust you, I believe in you.
Thank you.
I guess I would say that the success rate, it's hard to gauge, right? Because some people will come and they will have multiple arrests, and then eventually you will see them and they come back to court, as Judge Camacho said. You know, I had a young woman come find me several times in the past couple of years. Hey, Judge Martocci, look, I got my kids back. So it's very hard to tell what is success. I would say that it's somewhere in the 50% range, truly, but that's 50% more than we had before. And for those people for whom it was a success, it's everything.
How do you measure success? They're going to get rearrested. Please understand that. They're going to get rearrested. I knew that. They can't just leave. Oh, great. I found this guy says I should get out of this. I'm out of there. They're going to come back, and they're going to curse at you and yell at you. They're going to come back probably again and again and again until you finally reach them.
All right, on that note, I think it's time for all of us to stretch our legs. And there's some good refreshments out in the back, so help yourself. 15 minutes, guys.